She never imagined her 20s would look like this. Not the cracked linoleum floors, the smell of burnt bacon clinging to her uniform, or the ache in her feet before the morning rush even began. But here she was, Chloe Miller, 25 years old, trying to keep her head above water in a world that seemed determined to pull her under. Every morning started the same. She tied her dark hair into a neat bun, pulled on the black sneakers, already worn thin, and pasted on a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Customers saw her as the polite waitress who never forgot a coffee refill. What they didn't see was the rent notice tucked on her fridge, the hospital bills waiting in a stack on the kitchen table, and her mother, Claire, who needed dialysis 3 times a week. Once, Chloe had dreamed of painting. She used to fill sketchbooks with portraits, believing that if she could capture a face well enough, she could capture the soul behind it. But dreams didn't keep the lights on. Now her hands carried plates of pancakes instead of brushes, her art supplies shoved in a box at the back of the closet. That Tuesday morning felt heavier than most. The clatter of forks, the hiss from the griddle, the steady stream of orders. It was the same routine, but it pressed harder on her shoulders. And then she noticed him. A man sat alone in this corner booth, a worn tweed jacket draped across narrow shoulders, his cup of black coffee long gone cold. He didn't stir, didn't fidget. His eyes simply followed the room, calm and unreadable. Most people would have dismissed him as another lonely stranger passing time, but Chloe saw something familiar in his expression. A quiet kind of loneliness, the same kind she carried every time she looked in her own mirror. What she didn't know yet was that the quiet man in the corner wasn't just watching, he was waiting. And before the day ended, her life would take a turn she never saw coming. The bell above the diner door jingled, and the atmosphere shifted in an instant. A man in his 30s walked in, his tailored suit looking out of place against the chipped tables and buzzing neon sign. His voice carried across the room as he spoke into his phone, words about deals, assets and deadlines, loud enough for everyone to hear. Chloe grabbed a menu and started toward him. He didn't look up when she reached the booth. He only snapped his fingers. "Double espresso, make it quick." Her jaw tightened, but she nodded and turned away. That was when the door opened again. Arthur shuffled in, clutching a bundle of old newspapers to his chest. He was a familiar figure in this part of town, an older man with tired eyes and a beard gone grey. A veteran Chloe knew from conversations here and there. He never begged, never made trouble. Sometimes Sal, the diner's owner, let him sit in the back on cold mornings, and Chloe would mark a bowl of soup as a kitchen mistake. Today, Arthur looked colder than usual. He made his way quietly toward the far booth, just trying to disappear into the background. But the man in the suit noticed him right away. His expression soured. "You've got to be kidding me," he said, pulling out his earpiece. "What kind of place is this? I'm trying to eat, and you let people like that walk in?" He gestured toward Arthur with a dismissive flick of his hand, as if he were shooing away a stray dog. The room fell silent. Even the students at the corner table stopped talking. Sal came out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. His voice was calm but firm. "He's not bothering anyone. He just needs to warm up." "He's bothering me," the man shot back. "Get him out of here or I'll make a call. Pretty sure the health department would be interested in your clientele." Arthur froze halfway into the booth, shame already etched across his face. Slowly, painfully, he began to stand. He wouldn't argue, he'd simply leave. That was when Chloe snapped. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was the memory of her father, a kind man who had worked hard and been broken by a system that valued profit over people. Or maybe it was just the truth, that some things couldn't be ignored. She walked over and set the espresso on the table with a sharp click. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "That man has a name. His name is Arthur. He served this country, and he's welcome here." The businessman scoffed. "Oh, I see. You buying his breakfast too?" "Yes," Chloe said without hesitation, "I am." A ripple went through the diner. One of the construction workers at the counter began to clap. Then another joined in, until the sound filled the room. Chloe's cheeks burned, but she didn't step back. Arthur's eyes watered as he looked at her, disbelief softening into gratitude. The man in the suit muttered something under his breath, threw a $5 bill onto the table, and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Chloe turned to Arthur with a small smile. "Sit down, have some breakfast, it's on me." Arthur's voice was rough. "I can't let you do that." "You already did," she replied. "Now what'll it be? The pancakes are good today." From the corner booth, the quiet man in the tweed jacket kept watching. Not judging, just observing. His eyes followed Chloe, and though she didn't notice, they never left her. Arthur settled into the booth hesitantly, still looking like he might bolt at any second. Chloe poured him a cup of coffee, her hand steady this time. The diner's noise began to rise again, forks clinking, conversations resuming. But there was still an edge in the air, as if everyone present carried a piece of what had just happened. Arthur wrapped his hands around the mug, soaking in the warmth. "Haven't had someone stand up for me like that in a long time," he murmured. Chloe smiled faintly. "Well, maybe it's about time someone did." She turned back toward the counter, already grabbing her order pad to keep the rhythm of the morning going. From the corner, the man in the tweed jacket continued to watch. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, his silver hair neatly combed back. There was a quiet dignity about him, a calm that contrasted with the noise of the diner. He hadn't touched his food yet. His coffee sat cooling in front of him, forgotten. When Chloe passed by to refill cups, he spoke at last. His voice was low, steady. That took courage. Chloe glanced at him, surprised. It just felt like the right thing to do. The man studied her for a moment as though weighing her words. Then he gave a small nod and returned to silence, his eyes thoughtful. Arthur, meanwhile, had started on his pancakes. Between bites, he looked up at Chloe. "Most people don't even see me anymore. They look right through me. But you..." His voice caught. He cleared his throat. "You reminded me I still matter." Chloe felt her chest tighten. She reached out, just briefly, and touched his shoulder. "You've always mattered, Arthur. Don't forget that." For a while the diner hummed along like any other morning. Orders came in, plates went out, the bell above the door chimed with new customers. But something subtle had shifted. The regulars seemed a little softer with their words. The college kids left a few extra dollars on their check, and Arthur sat a little straighter in his seat, as though dignity had been returned to him. Still, Chloe couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Not in a threatening way, but in a way that made her wonder, who exactly was that man in the corner? And why did he seem more interested in her than in his untouched breakfast? The morning rush slowly thinned out, leaving behind the familiar rhythm Chloe knew by heart. Coffee cups clinked, the smell of bacon lingered, and a soft hum from the jukebox filled the quieter space. Arthur was finishing his last bites, a little more at ease than when he first walked in. Chloe carried a tray back behind the counter when the man in the tweed jacket finally stood. He moved with a calm steadiness, his presence commanding attention without asking for it. He placed a few bills neatly on the table, though his plate was barely touched. As Chloe reached for his check, he spoke in a voice that was measured, almost thoughtful. It's rare to see kindness that isn't looking for an audience. She froze for a second, caught off guard, then offered a small smile. "I don't know if it was kindness. It just felt wrong to stay quiet." His eyes held hers for a moment, steady and unreadable. That's exactly what makes it rare. Arthur glanced up from his seat, looking between them curiously, but said nothing. The man gave him a respectful nod before turning back to Chloe. "You carry yourself differently," he said, as if noting something only he could see. Like someone used to carrying more weight than just trays. Chloe let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. Maybe it's just the double shifts, but there was something in his gaze that unsettled her. Not in a dangerous way, but in the way someone seems to see past the surface, past the polished smile she offered to every customer. The man didn't press further. He simply slipped his coat on, gave a polite nod, and walked out into the cool morning. The bell above the door chimed once, then stilled. Chloe stood for a moment, holding the slip of paper he had left behind. Not just the payment, but a tip far larger than what his untouched meal called for. Arthur whistled softly. "Guess you made quite an impression." Chloe tucked the bills away, her mind unsettled. She had no idea why a stranger's words stayed with her longer than they should. But something about him felt unfinished, like he hadn't just come for breakfast. The diner slowly returned to its usual pace. Plates clattered in the sink, The smell of fresh coffee drifted, and the booths filled again with chatter from regulars who never noticed the tension that had passed through the room. To them, it was just another ordinary morning. But for Chloe, it didn't feel ordinary anymore. She caught herself glancing at the door more than once, as if the stranger might walk back in. The way he had spoken, measured, precise, almost as though he had been weighing her words, stayed with her like a melody she couldn't shake. Arthur lingered over his coffee, watching her with the easy patience of someone who'd seen too much to be surprised by much anymore. Finally, he said, "Don't let it eat at you. Some people say things just to hear themselves talk." Chloe smiled faintly. Maybe, but he didn't feel like one of those people. Arthur gave a low hum, not disagreeing, just letting the silence stretch between them. He finished his coffee and stood, his joints stiff, but his back straight. He tipped his cap toward her, the same way he did every morning. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, kid. Don't overthink it." As he left, Chloe busied herself wiping the counter, but her mind was far from the diner. She thought of the man's words, used to carrying more weight than just trays. She wasn't sure why it struck her so hard. Maybe because it was true, maybe because someone had finally noticed. The lunch rush came and went. By mid-afternoon, the diner was quiet again, sunlight pooling across the checkered floor. Chloe leaned against the counter, absently folding napkins into neat stacks. That's when she saw it. Tucked beneath the sugar caddy at the booth where the stranger had sat was a folded note, small enough to miss if you weren't looking. She picked it up, unfolded it carefully, and read the short line written in neat, deliberate handwriting. "You'll know why soon enough." Her breath caught. She looked around the diner as if expecting someone to explain it. But no one did. It was just her, the note, and a question that suddenly made her feel both curious and uneasy at the same time. Chloe folded the little note back into her apron pocket, but it might as well have been burned into her thoughts. The words were simple, but they carried weight, as if they weren't meant to be brushed off like a forgotten receipt. Through the rest of her shift, she moved on autopilot, pouring coffee, clearing plates, smiling at customers, but every now and then her hand would brush against the folded paper, and each time she felt the same tug of unease. By the time her shift ended, the sun had slipped low, painting the street outside in a warm orange haze. Chloe walked out with her bag slung over her shoulder, the familiar ache in her feet reminding her of another long day done. She paused at the curb, glancing back at the diner's glowing neon sign. Usually that sight gave her comfort. Tonight, it only made her wonder who exactly had walked out of those doors earlier. At the bus stop, she pulled the note out again, tracing the letters with her thumb. It wasn't just what it said, it was the certainty in the handwriting. Whoever wrote it hadn't been guessing, they knew. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of the thought. It was a message from Arthur, short and to the point, the way he always was. "Made it home, thanks for the pie." Chloe smiled despite herself. She typed back quickly. "Of course, see you tomorrow." The bus pulled up with a sigh of brakes and she climbed on, sliding into her usual seat near the middle. As the city blurred past the window, her mind wandered back to the stranger. His steady voice. The way his eyes had seemed to look through her, not just at her. When she finally reached her apartment, she set her bag down, kicked off her shoes and sank into the couch. She should have felt relief. Another shift survived, another day done. But instead, she pulled the note out once more, smoothing its creases on her knee. She whispered the words aloud as if they might reveal more in the saying, "You'll know why soon enough." The room stayed quiet, but inside her chest, questions echoed louder than ever. The following morning started like most others. Chloe tied her hair back, brewed a quick cup of coffee, and slipped into her uniform. But as she buttoned her shirt, her eyes kept landing on the folded note sitting on the counter. She considered leaving it behind, but at the last second she tucked it into her pocket. The diner was already buzzing when she arrived. Regulars filled the booths, the smell of bacon and toast hanging in the air. She tied her apron and slipped into rhythm, greeting customers, refilling mugs, scribbling down orders. For a while, the routine settled her nerves. That was until she saw him again. The same man from this day before walked in, almost unnoticed, and slid into a corner booth. This time, he didn't have the same air of a stranger testing the waters. He looked like he belonged, as if the seat had been waiting for him. Chloe hesitated at the counter, her pen hovering over her pad. She told herself not to overthink. Customers came and went, that's all he was, another customer. Still, when she walked over, her hand pressed against the folded note in her pocket, as if confirming it was real. "Coffee?" she asked, steadying her voice. He looked up, meeting her eyes with the same calm that had unsettled her before. "Yes, black, please, thank you." She poured his coffee, set the cup down and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "You found the note?" Her chest tightened. She turned back slowly, searching his face. "That was you?" He nodded once, no apology in his tone. "I figured you deserved a little warning." "Warning?" she asked, her voice low. He stirred his coffee, watching the swirl. "Let's just say, things aren't always what they look like in this place. And you'll see soon enough." Chloe stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether to press him or walk away. But a bell rang at the counter, pulling her back into the rush of work. She grabbed the slip of food waiting for her, her mind spinning, and left him with his coffee. From the corner of her eye, though, she caught him watching, not in a threatening way, but with a kind of certainty that left her unsettled. And for the first time, she realised the note hadn't been a riddle, it was a promise. The lunch rush always came fast and loud, and today was no different. Plates clattered in the kitchen, the bell above the door jingled non-stop, and Chloe barely had a second to catch her breath. She moved between booths, balancing trays and scribbling orders, her thoughts still circling the man's words from earlier. Things aren't always what they look like. It was halfway through the rush when the tension finally broke. At a booth near the window, two men in suits argued quietly at first, then louder, their voices sharp enough to cut through the chatter of the diner. One of them slammed a hand against the table, making the silverware jump. Chloe froze for a second, then forced herself to walk over. "Is everything all right here?" she asked carefully, her voice steady, though her hands tightened around the coffee pot. Neither man looked at her. Their argument was about money, something big, something messy, and one word kept repeating: contract. Other customers were beginning to notice. Heads turned, forks hovered mid-air. Before Chloe could step back, the man from the corner booth, the same stranger, was suddenly there, standing between her and the table. His presence was quiet but firm, and somehow the argument paused just long enough for him to speak. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "maybe this isn't the place." The two men stared at him, caught off guard, then muttered curses under their breath and tossed some bills on the table before leaving. The bell over the door rang once, and the room slowly exhaled. Chloe blinked, her heart racing. She hadn't even noticed she was holding her breath until then. She turned to the stranger. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. He gave her the faintest smile. "Maybe not, but you see what I meant now, don't you?" And before she could ask more, he returned to his booth, calm as ever, leaving her standing in the middle of the diner, questions burning in her chest. The diner had quieted down after the incident, but Chloe's mind hadn't. Even as she wiped down tables and refilled cups, her eyes drifted again and again toward the corner booth. The man sat there like nothing had happened, quietly eating his pie as if breaking up a near fight was just another part of his day. When her shift finally slowed, Chloe brought a fresh pot of coffee to his table. She didn't ask if he wanted a refill, she just poured it, needing an excuse to linger. "You knew exactly what to say back there," she said softly, careful not to sound like she was prying. Most people would have stayed out of it. He looked up at her, his eyes steady, a little tired, but kind. "I've seen too many arguments start small and end badly. Sometimes stepping in early saves everyone a lot of pain." Chloe tilted her head, curious. "Sounds like you've had experience." A shadow flickered across his face, gone as quickly as it appeared. He took a slow sip of coffee, then set the cup down with deliberate calm. "Let's just say I used to work in rooms where voices like theirs decided things that could change lives. When you've lived long enough in that kind of world, you don't forget the tone of desperation." Chloe blinked. The words felt heavier than casual conversation. She wanted to press him, to ask what kind of world he meant, but something in his expression told her to hold back. Instead, she tried another path. "You remind me of someone who carries stories around, but doesn't tell them unless asked the right way." The man's lips curved into a faint smile. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just someone who appreciates a place where the coffee is strong and the people are still real." Before Chloe could answer, the bell above the door jingled and a group of teenagers came bustling in, filling the diner with noise again. She gave him a small nod and hurried off to tend to them, but inside, her thoughts spun faster than before. Who was this man who spoke like he'd lived a dozen lives? And why, for reasons she couldn't explain, did she feel like his story was about to collide with hers? The diner had emptied out by the time the man slid a few bills under his coffee cup. Chloe noticed he left more than enough to cover the pie and coffee, but not in a showy way. Just enough that she'd know it wasn't a mistake. As she walked over, he rose from the booth and adjusted the cuff of his worn jacket. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice carrying more weight than the words themselves. Chloe hesitated. "For what? I should be thanking you. You kept that fight from getting ugly." He shook his head. "Not for that. For treating me like anyone else." His gaze lingered on hers for a moment, steady and kind. People forget sometimes that a person's worth isn't written on their sleeve. Before she could respond, he picked up his hat from the table. In that small movement, Chloe noticed a gold pin tucked discreetly into the lining, something official, though she couldn't quite place it. It flashed for only a second before he slid the hat on and started toward the door. Her heart skipped. She almost called out, almost asked the questions stacking in her chest. "Who are you? What did you mean by rooms that changed lives?" But something inside told her not to. Instead, she just said, "Come back sometime, first cup's on me." The man paused at the door, the corners of his mouth turned up into a faint smile. "Careful with offers like that. Some of us might take you up on it." And then he was gone, the bell above the door jingling softly in his wake, leaving Chloe staring after him with more questions than answers. But in her chest there was also something else, a strange calm, as if his presence had reminded her that the world was bigger than her struggles, and that sometimes strangers carry truths that quietly change the way you see yourself. She didn't know if she'd see him again, but she knew, deep down, that she'd remember his words long after the night's dishes were cleared. Kindness doesn't need a stage or a title. Sometimes the quiet moments with strangers remind us that every person has a worth far deeper than what the world chooses to see. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for that. If you found meaning here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Rain Inside for more stories that touch the heart. I'll see you again soon on the channel.